Hey, this is Jim Fedor. I am your personal Bible teacher, and you're listening to the Bible Exposition Channel. Hey, welcome back to all my friends out there. This is Jim. We are studying the Rational Bible, the commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible by Dennis Prager. And we're going to get to a story today, the story of the Lord asking Abraham to basically kill his son. And this story has always given me pause. I mean, for a lot of years, I could not understand how a loving God could ask a man to do something like this. But I want to see what Prager has to say about it. And obviously, we're going to start out here in chapter 22, verse 1, where it does say that sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. Prager, for one unconventional but provocative interpretation of the story, that this serves as a lesson in empathy to Sarah. See, I have never heard this before. This is an explanation that is novel to me. This serves as a lesson in empathy to Sarah for her treatment of Hagar and Ishmael. Wow. He writes this. In this verse, God is rendered Ha Elohim, the God, capital G. In the great majority of cases, God is referred to as Elohim, but in a few, or more than a few, instances, God is referred to as Ha Elohim, the Elohim. Prager says, I assume there's a reason, but couldn't find one. However, I believe it is worth noting. He says, what is most important to note is the very first sentence of the binding of the Isaac story. The God, Ha Elohim, put Abraham to the test. And that lets the Bible reader know that God did not want Isaac sacrificed, that he was only putting Abraham to the test. Man. So in the first 2 paragraphs of his commentary, he answers my question. It's amazing. He was putting Abraham to the test. He wasn't asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. And of course, this is shown at the end of the story when God stopped Abraham from going through with the sacrifice. He says, while this episode is known in Hebrew as Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, in our Western literature, it's always referred to as the sacrifice of Isaac. And that's how it was presented to us as young kids in Catholic school. A misnomer that distorts, listen to this is important, because this is what happened to me. This is how people can get brainwashed. This distorts the essence of the event, as God soon makes it clear that he never wants any human being to be sacrificed. Boy, that puts a whole new spin on this. I hope you all understand what just happened. It goes on in the Bible, chapter 22, verse 1. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Abraham's response, the Hebrew word hineni, here I am, has become the resonant among Jews as a statement of readiness to fulfill a calling. It's kind of like the army term, yes, sir. And he said, take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love. Now, though the translation doesn't note it, there is a Hebrew word, and it's just a simple N-A, na. In the text, following the word take, it explains na, which occurs more than 60 times in Genesis, and is used only five times in the Old Testament when God speaks to a person. Each time God asks an individual to do something staggering, like Moses get the Jews out of Egypt, something that defies rational explanation or understanding, here's an inkling at least that God is fully aware of the magnitude of what he's asking of Abraham. He's not asking the man to sacrifice his son, as we are told, as I was taught. So, why didn't God just say, Abraham, take Isaac? Why does God use these words and these descriptions like your favorite son or the only son whom you love? Why not just say Isaac? Take Isaac. That would be the definitive way to say it, right? But he says, take your favorite son, the one whom you love. Now, Prager says perhaps the purpose was to make the request, the command, all the more difficult for Abraham to obey. I mean, you start lavishing, praise on the boy of, I know he's your favorite. I know you love him to death. Man, that makes it even more, difficult to do what the Lord is asking. So he tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. Lech Lecha. The Hebrew word for go, Lech Lecha, were also the first words God said to Abraham when he told him to leave his father. He said, Lech Lecha, and go to another land. That was in Genesis 12:1. Now, God tells Abraham, take his son, leave his home, go to another land, Lech Lecha. This presumes God's orders are all the more compelling. So, why did Abraham do it? Why did he awaken early and go and sacrifice his son? Would you do it? Well, I don't know. I would probably just say, no, it was just a bad dream. So early next morning, presumably God appeared to Abraham at night, as I said, probably in a dream. And you got to ask yourself, why are we told Abraham woke early? Some commentators cite this as the Torah's way of communicating Abraham was eager to perform the commandment to kill his son, his beloved son. It's pretty hard to imagine, but I've heard that before. Maybe Abraham couldn't sleep that night. Maybe he wanted to get up before Sarah got up. But Prager has a simpler explanation. Listen to this. In the ancient world, one who sets out on a long journey leaves at the break of dawn, because leaving later wastes daylight. Man, that's pretty cool. So why didn't Abraham put up a fight? Why didn't he argue with God? He argued with God in the case of Sodom. I had never even thought of that. So why? Maybe because Sodom seemed to be an affront to justice. God seemed ready to kill innocent people. But the command to sacrifice his son, maybe that didn't strike Abraham as unjust, even though Isaac was totally innocent. Because, listen, in the ancient world, child sacrifice was universally considered acceptable. I didn't know that. Even admirable. Because people all over the world were doing this as devotion to their gods, small g. And because children were regarded as possessions, they didn't really have the same, status, I guess, that kids had later on. So, Abraham, understandably, may not have perceived the command to sacrifice Isaac as wrong morally, but rather as a command that God gave and he believed. Most puzzling, though, was not his being told to sacrifice Isaac, but being told to sacrifice the child whom God promised would be the father of nations. So, you got to put these things together in your head. And maybe Abraham did. How could the commandment to sacrifice Isaac be reconciled with God's promise of a future nation emanating from Isaac? Abraham was a smart guy. You think maybe he put two and two together? I think it's a possibility. So, in not fully understanding God's ways, Abraham represents every single believer, including me, that comes after him. Prager says the ultimate reason Abraham did not argue with God is this. His argument with God over destroying Sodom convinced him that God is just and God knows what's best. So, after Sodom, Abraham never, ever again argued with God. This is very, very interesting. Prager says, virtually every ancient society that we have data about had human sacrifice. The killing of human beings was a propitiation to that society's gods. And only if one understands this can you understand why our God, capital G, would test Abraham in this way. He's basically saying, are you, Abraham, willing to do for me what all other human beings are prepared to do for their false gods? And only by understanding how universal human sacrifice in those days, you can begin to appreciate how radically different the Torah was from every other society. And then the most important question. Why did only one book, why did only one culture, why did only one faith on earth abolish an evil practice that's being done by every other society and faith in the world? Why? Now we're starting to get deep into God's reasonings. So in this situation, once again, you got two choices. This abolition came from uniquely moral and indeed superior human beings, or it came from God, one or the other. And given human behavior throughout history, you got to be inclined to believe that it's because of God. I mean, there was human sacrifice going on all over the world. We have records of it happening in Central America, 14th century, 16th century. during biblical times, of course, the Torah repeatedly speaks of humans, specifically children, being sacrificed in the Canaanites. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of ritual human sacrifice in the Aztecs, in the Mayans, in the Incas, as well as in China. And believe it or not, it was documented to have happened in Africa and is still happening in Africa. Amazing, right? Now, from God's perspective, the command to sacrifice Isaac was, as the Torah notes at the beginning of the chapter, a test. And what was that test? God was asking Abraham, will you, Abraham, be as obedient to me, the only God, the one and only of the world, as others are to their man-made gods? Now, this is a question people have had to answer throughout history. Will the good be as committed to what is good and true as the bad are to what is bad and false? History reveals the answer is often no. From God's perspective, the command to sacrifice Isaac was a test. Look what's going on today. You know, all too often, decent people have had to fight indecent people until it was almost too late. And that's what's going on today in our country. Maybe it is too late. You know, most people are not good fighters. On the other hand, there are cases after cases after cases throughout history where people have been prepared to make the same sacrifice as Abraham. Vast numbers of parents have been willing to send their children to fight and die for a country's beliefs. If the cause is moral, they're preparing to do God's will. The question, therefore, is not whether parents, even in our time, are prepared to sacrifice their children. It's whether they're doing so for a good and true cause. Or are they doing it for an evil and false cause? You know, Afghanistan is the perfect example. Folks, we sent our kids over there for the last 20 years to fight and die for what they thought was a good cause. And then to have the rug pulled out from underneath them. These people, you know, these veterans who've been maimed and killed, they've got to be thinking, what was the purpose? Why do we even go over there? That wasn't a good and true cause, was it? The same thing happened in World War II, but for a better reason. Germany, Japanese, attacking all over the world. And in that case, the United States was one of the leaders in freeing the planet from fascism, and people who sent their kids over to help in that effort celebrate their child's death as like an Islamic suicide bomber does when their kid kills a number of infidels. And all that notwithstanding, the ultimate message of this story is that human sacrifice is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to God. The good God introduced to the world by the Torah abhors human sacrifice, and especially child sacrifice. That being said, verse 3, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. And I didn't realize this either, but Prager puts a little note in here that the Torah actually heightens the drama by continuing to emphasize the relationship between Abraham and Isaac? Throughout this whole experience, pay attention. Verse 3 goes on, he says, he split the wood for the burnt offerings. He set out the place of which God had told him. And on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. So Abraham was never recorded as having said a word during that 3-day journey. He seems to move about his grim task with silent resignation. Now, did it really take 3 days? Yeah, it says on the third day. The third day is often used in the Torah to refer to some ominous event, such as the execution of Hamor and the Shechemites, Genesis 34. The execution of Pharaoh's baker, Genesis 40:20. And Joseph testing his brothers in Genesis 42. Prager says, it may be that one should take on the third day in a similar way here. The expression is used not primarily for exact chronological purposes, but it's an idiom to underscore this drama that's being told in this narrative. Prager refers to a guy by the name of Joseph Telushkin, and he says that Telushkin has an alternate take on this trip. Why so long? Why 3 days to get to a place to sacrifice his son? Couldn't God find a place closer to home, which Abraham could have sacrificed Isaac? Most likely, God chose a place like that to underscore the hugeness, the magnitude of this test. In a moment of religious enthusiasm, Abraham might readily fulfill that command. People often say yes, but as time passes, regret having said yes. It's happened to me many times. So Abraham is forced to journey with Isaac for 3 days. And as Abraham gets closer and closer to that mountain, he's got to be suffering additional trepidation, right? What is he going to tell Sarah when he returns from the trip alone, right? So Abraham in verse 5 says to his servants, "Stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you." Isn't it odd that Abraham uses the word we here? The boy and I will go up there. We will worship and we will return to you. That's a clue, isn't it? Isn't he now assuming that he and Isaac are going to return? I don't know. Maybe he was trying to spare Isaac the pain of knowing what was about to happen. I got a feeling Isaac knows what's going to happen. It's possible he was concerned Isaac might resist. Or maybe he hoped that it was all a test. All of those could have happened. All of those possibilities could be true. And Abraham himself took the wood for the burnt offerings and put it on his son. He himself took the firestone and the knife. Now look, we don't know Isaac's age at this point. The verse indicates he was old enough to carry firewood up the mountain. So he's got to be probably in his teens, right? And in this passage here, the Torah uses a word that is uncommon, mashelet, which literally means feeder. It's a slaughtering knife. It's where we get the word machete from. And a slaughtering knife is a device or an implement which feeds people, which underscores the reality of what's about to take place. Abraham really had a killing knife in his hand. And the two walked off together. Then Isaac said to his father, Abraham, "Father?" That's the only thing that is said between Abraham and Isaac as recorded in the Torah. Now, I'm going to finish it here because I want to get to the rest of the story next time. Prager says this: while the Torah does not explicitly state Isaac's age at the time of the Akada, this conversation, along with the previous verse, suggests he is probably in his early teens rather than a young child, since he not only was able to carry the load of firewood, but understood that a sacrifice was about to be offered. That's where we're going to leave it. I'm going to leave you in suspense. I usually don't do that. Hey, this is Jim. I'm your personal Bible teacher. You've been listening to the Bible Exposition channel. Hope you'll have a great day. Stay tuned for part 2. Hey, this is Jim Sidor. I am your personal Bible teacher. If you like what you hear, and you think your friends and relatives would benefit by the teaching, please share it with everyone you know. Thanks, and have a great day.